You're listening to.
You're listening to.
You're listening to.
Y'all are listening to What's Left of the South.
Hey, thank you for tuning in to What's Left of the South, the podcast about Southern working class history and current events through leftist perspective. This podcast is brought to you by being in a new tax bracket, testosterone levels, anxiety, living at home, aging parents, Kai not having to live under a Tory government anymore, Nelson wondering where did it all go wrong, Mark is dead once again, and we're also counting down the days till Oasis breaks up once again. As always, I'm Nelson, who's had a panic attack all day, with my lovely co-host who's not dead.
And I'm with you all through the night on your radio.
Slowly taking over book talk. It's Kai.
Two fans at a time.
Fuck yeah, let's go. And our guest this evening is
Elle Griffith. I'm delighted to be joining from Nottingham in England. I'm an academic. Well, I'm a quasi-academic and two-bit journalist who dabbles in left politics and Appalachia specifically.
Yay! Yay!
I think we need to patent that. Whenever our guests introduce themselves, we do basically the Kermit arms. Yay!
Yay!
Every time.
Yay! We do the Kermit arms. I've been sick all this fake Labor Day weekend. It's not COVID. I took new tests, and it wasn't that. So I think it's my allergies and everything acting up, or God knows what it is. But I'll be in and out coughing. Real quick before we kick off, we gotta talk about something real quick. The old podcast, Pros the Roundtable, they're back. Apparently, they've all made amends and they're back in action. But I just want to tell you, Jeremy, since I've met you in real life, in person, unlike a lot of the people online that I talk to, twice actually, because you're from around here. You Yankees up there in Colorado think that you can just mosey on back into the podcast scene after you all imploded, doing I don't know what about something about beer and quoting Mao Zedong and whatever. But I just want to let you know that this new small to medium-sized podcast that's also been on Rev Left Radio in an even oversaturated market about left-wing politics in the United States. And if you think you could put out your fancy pants podcast about niche historical stuff about grain prices in the Soviet Union between 1960 and 1963 and get a bazillion followers on fucking Patreon once again, you son of a bitch, I hope you know that if you're not a bunch of cowards, you'll let us on and we'll talk about something super niche, because I know that's what you all like to do. And Jeremy, once again, if you're listening, I know you're gonna throw in some context, and another super niche episode for about an hour. I was listening to the Ukraine devolving into fascism. No, the Ukrainian nationalism, and great. It is. I just want to say, great episode. By the way, I am talking shit, but it is great, wonderful, informative episodes. But when we get to I'm 15 minutes into in 1000 BCE, these group of people came, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, dude, how far back do we need to fucking go when it comes to get to the point?
Do you remember when I was clowned on for saying 14,000 years ago?
Yes, 14,000. Wait, for some reason, the Big Bang theme song just started playing in my head because it's 14 billion years ago. The blah, 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 nerd misogyny, la, 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 la.
No, yeah. I'll raise the stakes just a little bit. That in the amount of time that I've been on this show, we are in our 4th year that I've been on this show. 4th year. Nobody has had the balls to get me on their show with something that I can actually talk about. I've been invited once to talk about something that I had no idea about. So if you got the cojones to get somebody on there, you're going to get us on there, and you're going to have me on there.
And Kai's going to lecture you about indigenous histories, you fucking white settler devils.
It's either going to be that or romance books. What's it going to be?
It's going to be indigenous romance books, you fucking piece of shit.
There's one coming out this year.
Yes. Fuck yes. And we're going to do an episode on it, and y'all can eat shit, not pros of the round table, just y'all in general. Okay.
Chat.
You know what?
You know how else likes to call you chat now?
Yeah, chat. I just want to say that fucking when they originally ended at like 49, 48, 49 episodes, and we like surpassed that, I was like, hey, we beat pros of the round table. We got to keep going. And now we're like 100 something, and now they're back and they're already at like 60 something. I'm just like, God damn it. The way they just spit out just content is ridiculous. I don't know how they do it. It's like always just, it's just like I don't know. It's so, the only way to describe it is like if they were able to like speed read an entire history book in an hour and a half about a subject. And it's like, how the fuck do y'all do this? It's just the constant, just in-depth historical niche, like I said, about grain prices in the Soviet Union between 1960 and 1963. Anyway, what are we talking about? Hi, you're taking over book talk. We do have a guest who is very, very smart and has been doing wonderful things and has been a mutual on social media for a while. And yeah, Elle, yay, let's go. I don't know, y'all. I'm so fucking tired. I'm beat.
I mean, I'm taking this to be a good preparation for. I have my we call it a viva over here, but you guys call it a thesis defense. So that's this time next week, I think. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So hopefully,
so you can go ahead and defend your dissertation with for me and Kai.
With a couple of chuckle fucks on here.
Chuckle fucks. Professor Kai and Professor Nelson. We're gonna the history department here at What's Left of the South. We're gonna Professor Mark is running late as always. So yeah, defend your thesis in front of us and the 500 people that are gonna listen to this episode.
So yeah, it's an interesting sort of way of framing it that you defend it. So I think I quite like that because I'm naturally sort of self-deprecating as a British woman. So, but I am fairly proud of. I say 4 years work, but it was 6 months really. I wrote the thing in 6 months, and I spent the other 3.5 years sort of traveling. Generously funded by the AHRC over here. So I got to visit Appalachia a lot. I got to visit lots of nice places in the US in general. But I'd always been, I don't think we have an equivalent name. Like to Americans who really like England, we call Anglophiles, but I've always been like, what do we call Brits who are obsessed with US, like whatever that is.
The original colonists.
Yeah.
I was gonna say something like a Yankophile, but that sounds awful.
But I can't say that on a southern podcast, can
I? No, damn Yankees.
See that comes with like the interesting part of speech where like to a British person, all Americans are Yankees, but to an American, if you're Southern, you're not a Yankee. But
no damn
I am myself Southern and used to being called a Yank by British people.
Or a septic tank, I think, is the Cockney rhyming slang for
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, I've always been the strength of sort of US cultural soft power to a Brit growing up consuming all that sort of stuff. So I was always interested in the US in general. I did my undergrad stuff on American studies, but it was piqued by Appalachia specifically. I'm going to be really unoriginal and say during the 2016 election, when we started seeing these kind of like parachute journalism jobs about Appalachia being Trump country, and you'd get like some journalist who just rocked up to some tiny ex-mining town in West Virginia and would like vox pops with the locals, try and get them to say whatever they wanted about. And you'd find that actually a lot of them didn't love Trump. It was like more like a political apathy situation, but that didn't really fit the narrative. So and I was working as a journalist at the time, and I was kind of like, oh, this is really interesting. Like, this region is specifically, it's not all of it is the South. A lot of people use it sort of synonymously, of course, with the South, but you can be Pennsylvanian and Appalachian, and that they definitely wouldn't be what you consider the US South, right? Yeah. So it just, and I definitely have some sort of undiagnosed autism, as most academics do. So I became hyper fixated on on this region.
You're in the right place.
Yeah. And yeah, as I get ready to present my thesis defense after like 7 years, I'm like, Jesus Christ, that was quite a big hyper focus. That was a big one. Like, we really went deep with that one. So yeah, my thesis in the end ended up being a sort of analysis of Appalachian leftists, because I was like, okay, so if we're saying that Appalachia isn't necessarily Trump country and it's really reductive to say that, then who are the people who are sort of providing a counter to that? I should probably figure that out. And I sort of portrayed this Appalachian left as quite sort of like a blueprint, really, for if you compare it to liberalism in the 2010s that was coming out of big sort of metropolitan cities. A lot of that sort of aesthetic and that sort of politics, that praxis is like dated really quickly. So there's like a lot of cringe stuff that people look back on now. Although it is having some sort of obnoxious renaissance at the moment with the sort of DNC stuff. So they've managed to date my conclusion within less than a month. I only handed in a month ago. And I was sort of saying that this like celebrity liberalism is on its way out. It's had its death rattle. And I was like, oh no, we've got the DNC convention where they're, doing these little videos to Queen, We Will Rock You, and it's while genocide's going on and stuff. So I was like, yeah. But the overarching argument is kind of that liberals suck. And where do they get off sort of pointing the finger at Appalachia as some sort of reactionary backwater when actually these people come from a lineage of union activism, and sort of they're quite au fait with the language of leftism, because that's where obviously a lot of the US labour movement started, and that was completely neglected in the 2010s because the idea of strikes or labour or any sort of activism of that ilk had completely fallen off, and everyone was just kind of like obsessed with this bastardized identity politics stuff, which already looks quite naff and dated, like I was saying. So yeah, liberals suck, and Appalachia rules. Yeah, that's fine. That's the argument.
I think it's so to go back to what you said about how people like to like synonymous like with the South and Appalachia. It was like I always have to remind people that like, hey, there's a lot of us in the South that are not part of Appalachia, and there's like distinct different accents and distinct different economic backgrounds. Like I'm like my family, excuse me, my family that is from the South or from the deep South, right? They're in the Bible Belt. Like they're part of the planter class. Like they're not,
right.
They have that antebellum, like the Southern drawl. And I remember one comedian said it best. He was from the high country in the Carolinas, the high country in South Carolina, and he had the Southern twang. And someone was like, you're mistaking the wrong accent. Like I have the working accent. Like that the racist accent you're thinking about is like Lindsey Graham. They didn't work. And they got other people to work for them, and they sat on the porches all day and drank mint juleps and sweet tea and talk slow like that. So it's just like, yeah, there's people like really, especially outside of the South and even Appalachia, like to think of it as like Louisiana is in the South that has nothing to do with Appalachia. It's like
right.
I don't even understand.
Couldn't be more culturally different. Yeah,
exactly. And it's a different religion, different culture, different language, different everything. And it is really funny how people like to say that the South is in Appalachia, like it's synonymous, right? Like it's synonymous with the South. Like it's not, because it goes all the way into New York and into Canada,
right?
And it's just like it's not South.
There is actually a hard and fast definition. So the Appalachian Regional Commission was formed in the 60s during the War on Poverty, and it's by county, so it's obviously not by state. So you get West Virginia is the only state that is entirely Appalachian, so all its counties are Appalachian, whereas the other ones have like a sort of swathe, like Western North Carolina or sort of Southern Virginia and so on. So a lot of the time, there'll be overlap as well with like the concept of like the Rust Belt, which is another thing that people kind of like just used as a catch-all for kind of like a white working class thing. And you saw a lot of crossover with those terms. Anytime you're talking about Trump and people just want to talk about this mythical kind of working class, and it's like a dog whistle for basically being white and male, because obviously that's what the working class is. It's like
obviously, yeah.
It has, yeah. So yeah, you see it used incorrectly in a lot of ways, really, especially in journalism.
As somebody like from the outside coming in, like what was something that really stuck out to you that you found in your studies about Appalachia?
Well, it's interesting. There's this big sort of thing in academia for like examining your positionality, they call it. So it's which has been brought about by a lot of white people researching like sort of indigenous history or African American history and being called out and being like, what the fuck are you doing this for? So now it's become this sort of like everybody has to assess what their positionality is to their research. And I kind of naively thought I'd avoided that a little bit because I was just like, I'm just looking at working class people. But that was kind of...
No, but you're part of the crown. Last time y'all were over here, you all burned the White House to the ground. It was like, no.
So I was like, actually, have I studied something about class to absolve myself of studying about race? Like that's definitely a thing that British people do. But when I was actually on the ground in Appalachia, I noticed I had like a sort of Louis Theroux effect, I think, where like, people would talk to me quite openly because I was so obviously like a fish out of water that they were just like, what the fuck are you doing around here?
You sound funny.
Yes. And the novelty of me really was just kind of interesting to them. Like, I remember this guy being like, telling me that he'd been to Holland. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a different country, but good for you, buddy. Like, they just wanted to come up to me and tell me something.
You remind me of Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, funnily enough, our dearly departed friend, ex-host of the show, Tyler, who's not dead. I do that to the chat every time. He's not dead. I just like saying that because it's funny. Tyler was very excited to speak to my husband for the first time because my husband is English, and he said he'd never talked to a British person before.
Right.
And I've noticed that my husband, outside of Florida, because Florida has a whole different concept of otherness, but when my husband is in these places, people he gets away with things. Like, he's not trying to get away with things, but he gets away with things because he's so exotic to them. But exotic in a, let me see, like, if we're looking at like a positive versus negative, exotic in a positive way.
Exactly.
Like, he just gets away with it. Which is really weird to say about like the whitest British man.
Because like he's like in cargo shorts, flip-flops, and a t-shirt, and then if he didn't open his mouth, he would just be another American. And it's like, oh no, and it's like, whoa, buddy, what the fuck?
He undergoes a transformation when he touches down in Florida, because when he arrives, he looks like a British man. But as soon as he gets to Florida, it's too hot to look like that anymore. And I have influenced him so much that like, you don't dress like a British person on holiday, you dress like an American. Basically, I dress him. So like, you can't tell until he starts talking.
No, I spent time in... Sorry.
Did they ask you about Hogwarts? Did you get any questions about Harry Potter?
I usually get, actually, thankfully dodged anything about Harry Potter, but I remember I was on a Greyhound bus once between somewhere going to LA, and it was about 2 hours outside of LA, and it was really fucking rough. And they were like, I wasn't planning on opening my mouth to speak because I was like, that's going to make things worse. Like, but I had to because I asked someone to move a chair or something, and then everybody realized I was English, and they were like fighting over each other as to who got to ask me a question. So like, I had to like one at a time, and a lot of them were sort of like, have you met the Queen? I was like, no, not really. But yeah, I spent time in New York and the big cities and stuff, and obviously nobody gives a shit that you're English. But so I think there is a sort of like narcissistic element to that. I like going somewhere where I get, the red carpet rolled out for me a little bit. But yeah, like I think it works for journalists and it works for academics and what have you, that even though Appalachia has this horrible sort of storied history of being exploited by outsiders and sort of like voyeurs and, and rubbernecking sort of poverty porn. So I was always conscious of not appearing like that. But I think it does. There's a lot to be said for the fact that I'm not. They can tell I'm not a Yankee or I'm not American. I'm not coming down to sort of like. They can't place me. They have no idea what I'm doing.
You ain't one of them Yankees. Where you from?
But yeah, and it's a cliche, but like the hospitality and the friendliness has been absolutely just mind blowing, really, because I'm from the north of England, which has a sort of reputation as being much friendlier than the English South, which is fairly true, fairly accurate. But it's nothing compared to like the sort of US South and Appalachia. Like Jesus, like I just would meet people and like we'd just instantly become best friends, and it just drive me halfway across the state just to do like a favor and stuff. It was just very welcoming, very lovely people. Yeah,
that is sweet. That is sweet.
It is.
I think
I miss it.
so like when I taught history last year, we do go over a lot of labor history because that was a lot with the final exam was on the progressive era and the labor movement, etc. And I remember telling them about Blair Mountain and like going out west and the Ludlow massacre, but like specifically Blair Mountain, and they were like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot. This is not taught like ever. There's like nothing about this." And so like telling them about like the coal miners' wars and Blair Mountain, and Harlan County and other stuff that's popped off in history in Appalachia, they're just like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, this is a thing that happened." And they were just like, "We can't believe that this happened. Like this is not a thing that's taught." It did make it's like definitely I feel like resurrection and like in like 2016 or 2015, like around, especially with the 100-year anniversary. But now it's unfortunately coming back for the wrong reason, because that jackass JD Vance is Trump's VP pick, and that disgusting that we did an episode on. Shout out to our episode on hillbilly. How do you say it again?
Elegy.
Hillbilly elegy. I say hillbilly edging, and it's apparently it's frowned upon. A gooning memoir of a boy in Appalachia, but even though that fuck is like not from Appalachia, like he moved, like,
well, that's another example of like he's from a county that isn't considered Appalachia. So if you're going to be a pedant about it, it's like from doesn't even go here. Like
it's like Mean Girls. Go here. But fucking what is like he hung out with grandma over the summer, and he's just like they just like the thing is like I just remember like NPR liberals like loving that fucking book, and they were like, "This is the greatest fucking thing ever." Look, he said that they're poor and lazy, so we can say that they're poor and lazy and not feel bad anymore.
And what was really interesting about that is, I mean, that was I'd say that was kind of like a catalyst for my PhD in a way, because people recommended I read Hillbilly Elegy, sort of with a straight face. They were like, "Oh, it's really good. Like, you'll probably find it really." And I was like, "What the fuck is this book, man? This is terrible." Like, and it was you sort of American liberals who just had no idea how to talk about class because they'd never had to. And then once all of a sudden class was like reignited as this topic in 2016, they were like, "Oh, okay, like I'm just gonna," and there's a sort of deference, I think, to like kind of like identity politics thing, where it was like, okay, we need somebody to tell us, we need this explained to us, and we're just going to take this guy's word for it that he knows what he's talking about because he's grew up poor. It's like, as you say, he wasn't even from Appalachia, and it was all culture of poverty tropes that you would see. That a lot of the liberal class by that point would not have necessarily accepted about African Americans in inner cities. They would have been able to recognize that for the kind of right-wing tosh that it was. But for some reason, when it was like repurposed to be about the white working class, we were like, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, this is what's right." It's like, how can you not see that that's the same shitty argument for why people are poor? It was they were sort of wrong-footed by it completely and embarrassingly fawning over a really bad book.
So you were mentioning how, like, for many Americans, they never had to like face and talk about class within their own country before. And being an English person and recognizing how class is so ingrained and so important in everything that you do in England, like, can you like explain what you've seen of like the comparison, the contrast between like the American version of dealing with class versus the British version of dealing with class?
I think, well, for a start, obviously, there's a big difference in that class in America is much more tied to money. So like you're in the club if you strike it big and you're a millionaire, or maybe not a millionaire these days, but I don't think that gets you very far.
Just a piddly million.
A shitty house in New Jersey, maybe, but like, yeah.
Just some McMansion on the outskirts of fucking Reno.
Yeah.
Like,
being a millionaire is still middle class in America.
Like Dr. Evil when he's like $1 million. Like, yeah, that's not actually.
It's nice, bud.
So yeah, like if you made a lot of money, then you were kind of in the club. Like there was always concepts of like being the nouveau riche and being a bit sort of classless with it. You know, like if you like some sort of oil tycoon from the south, and maybe people in Philadelphia would look down on you or something. I don't know. There was always a bit of culture with it. But yeah, because it's so tied to money, I think it's been harder to sort of, for a lot of Americans to sort of see. And a lot of Americans, in my experience, still cling to the American dream a little bit. So they think, well, that might be me one day. So I'm not going to like shit on people who have power and have money because I want to be one of them. Whereas over here, there's only so high you can rise. I mean, you can make a shitload of money, I'm sure, in sort of financial sector and stuff. But if you're from a council estate, like that's always going to be kind of imprinted on you. And we have an actual upper class, have an aristocracy, which if you made all the money in the world, you can't buy your way into them. So I think that changes how we see it culturally. Also, what I always notice, it's just quite strange, is that middle class over here is always used as a sort of like derogatory term. Like,
yeah, it's like almost a pejorative.
Yeah, that's so middle class, and you're like, fuck off, I'm not middle class. Like,
they'll actively be shopping in Waitrose and say, fuck off, I'm not middle class.
It's always tied to something really stupid and cultural, like buying hummus. It's like hummus is just an ethnic food, for fuck's sake. Like, but it's just like really stupid cultural stuff like that. But also, we don't really know what middle class means in this country. I think they did a poll, and most people still identified as working class. I thought, well, that literally makes no sense. But most people don't want to be called middle class in this country. You either a sort of working class, salt of the earth type, or you're an aristocrat. You know, the middle class is sort of a joke, and they're looked down upon quite a lot, just for being kind of a bit naff and like embarrassing. Yeah. Whereas in the US, like the middle class, like I remember seeing that the Simpsons were the typical American middle class family. I was like, what the fuck? They're supposed to be middle class, like
not anymore.
I mean, yeah, that opens up a whole other kind of worms about how the fuck they afforded that house and everything. But like just culturally, you know, it was like Homer's obviously an idiot. That's the whole fucking joke of the show and stuff. So it's much more tied to sort of culture in this country. The problem with that is that, like I said, you know, it's about shopping in Waitrose and buying hummus and stuff. That obscures the economic reality over here of class. So like I'm from the north of England, but I've lost my accent quite a bit over the years. So, you know, if I go back, people will say, oh, you're posh. And it's like, well, no, I've literally got like minus £2,000 in my bank account right now. Like I'm absolutely not posh. Whereas I think in America, like, yeah, it's just Americans don't know how to talk about class. And when they started trying to in the 2010s, it became a big identity thing. And a big sort of giveaway for that, I always find, is that you'll find a lot of liberals now will say things like, that's classist, or like, I don't want to be classist, this is classism. And I find that kind of a weird concept, because not to go too sort of Marxist about it, but it's like, well, that's just, you're just giving language to something that is essentially just being impolite. You know, you're being a snob, but that's not really what class is. It's about power and who controls it. So like being rude about people in Appalachia being, you know, barefoot with no teeth and these horrible sort of tropes, they're obviously rooted in sort of a class hatred, but it's not like, it's not really a power analysis, if you see what I mean. It's just kind of like, it's liberals are so used to saying something's homophobic or something's racist or something's some sort of prejudice, that's the sort of lens they have for looking at class, rather than being like, wait, hang on, who the fuck has got the money in this country? Like, why do I have to work 4 jobs to make rent? It's much more a sort of like, don't be mean to poor people, which is always, a good rule of thumb to not be a piece of shit and be really snobby, but that's not really what the problem is. It's they don't have like a sort of deeper power analysis of it. If that makes sense.
Kyle, that was a banger fucking question. I'm not gonna lie, that was deep.
This is
that
the
was
one
a really
episode where
deep discussion. That was great.
My Venn diagrams actually like met for 1 second.
That because I'm thinking. So if I'm allowed to, Kyle, am I allowed to talk?
Fuck off.
That's a really good point, because it's really interesting though what you said. It really got me thinking about when I took Southern politics in undergrad and grad school, because in Southern politics in the South, like I'm not talking about like the deep South, right? So South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and even into like the northern parts of those states that like are for the like the inland South Carolina, North Georgia, North Alabama, like the foothills of Appalachia. Like the way you described class as not necessarily being like about money is how the South is described a lot during the antebellum period. Like there is the aristocracy, there is the planter class who are the aristocracy, and you are born into that or you're not. And it's the 3 major classes that we talked about in Southern politics at that time before the Civil War were the planter class, the white yeomanry, and then slaves. And that was we talked about like how the North industrialized and like embraced capitalism and embraced the quote unquote American dream. And there was like, you could be from nothing and then become a multimillionaire, right? And you could be part of the rich, right? You could be that upper class in the North, but you could never do that in the South, because either, like I said, you were either born into the planter class or you were a white yeoman or you were a slave. And it was really interesting how those 3 classes interacted, especially after the Civil War, when the planter class still had their power and like adapted to the new society, and the white yeomanry and now freed slaves, and how they all at some point combined and worked at certain like points of interest where they were just like what am I trying to say? Like they would, like, for example, we talked about the populist movement in the South. So like the white working class and then the black working and like the black population in the South like combined to have some political power until the planter class and the aristocracy basically got at the end of Reconstruction was like, hey, in the 1890s, like, hey, we need to be like, you're white, we need to go with us, and we'll give you some better crumbs and make you guys cops and do whatever. And they drummed up old racist tropes and were like, hey, you're with us now. And then you have like all the race riots in the 1890s and the black codes, and then become Jim Crow. But it just really got me thinking about how the difference in the country, especially before the Civil War, and how you described the British like class system and the aristocracy was how I've always learned about the South during the antebellum period. And I know it's a TV show, but there was that one episode or two of Peaky Blinders where like Tommy and the Shelbys, like, they're rich, they're multimillionaires, but they're snubbed by the aristocracy who were like officers. And they're like, Tommy's like, we may be rich, but we weren't officers. Like, we'll never be like part of their, we'll never be accepted by them. Even if I marry into them, I'll never be accepted because I am Romani and Irish, and I was a sergeant and they're British officers. So that was really interesting what you guys talked about, because I was like, I didn't really think about that, because I do have the American experience of like the 20th century, 21st century. Like, hey, you can come from like, you could be, not necessarily come from nothing, because that has a myth, but like be lower middle class and now be Jeff Bezos, like billionaire, and be the aristocracy. Whereas like if he like grew up, like you said, in council homes in the north of England and became a billionaire, he could still never be part of the aristocracy. Like, he'll still
and
always
you'd see
be
it a lot.
Council home person.
You'd see the media in particular likes to sort of like put people back in their place. You see it with footballers in the country a lot. So
fucking Alan Sugar. Alan Sugar is like one of the richest men in the country for a long time. But it's always going to come down to like Alan Sugar can have a TV show. He can be one of the richest people in the country. He could have made bad investments and everything, but he's never going to be the upper echelon of actually important people.
Right. Yeah. Anybody who's sort of self-made, there was like kind of like a lot of comedy sketches in the 80s because a lot of people got rich in the 80s under Thatcher. So you call them, yeah, you call them like white band men. So sort of plumbers or decorators, or I don't really know, who would suddenly make quite a bit of money, but it was a kind of like a trope that they were a bit classless and they were a bit, so they would flash with their cash and they'd buy kind of like
loads
gaudy
of money. It's the
loads of money. That's right. Yeah.
Anybody, like, there's gonna be like 2 people who listen to this that understand what I said and what you agreed with. But yeah, like you were talking about, I can't remember exactly which show it was from, but it was like this guy
Harry
from like
Enfield, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, he made loads of money, and like the whole thing is that he dresses kind of weird and he's goofy and he's obviously like not an upper class, like super educated guy. He just throws loads of cash everywhere, and that became like, that doesn't sound like a comedy sketch, but in the context of Britishness, especially Englishness, that is a comedy sketch.
Yeah, it was a recognizable caricature, definitely, of the era. I mean, it's everything you can say about that from an English cultural perspective. I guess there is American equivalents, like, I guess you see like the sort of guys on The Sopranos, like, are rich, and that's a lot of the sort of punchline. Punchline is supposed to be that they're kind of classless. What was it he says when they go to Italy and the Italians guy is like, and you thought the Germans were classless pieces of shit.
Yeah, Paulie's like, oh, can I get some spaghetti and gravy? And they're like, what gravy? What the fuck? It's like, I thought what do you say? I thought the Germans were classless.
With classless pieces,
like, yeah, some shit. And then like Paulie's like, commendatory, and they're just like, get the fuck out of here.
Well, there's something that I wanted to add before it escapes my brain, because my brain is hardly holding on to information tonight. But one of the things that I learned is that in previous, like, older decades, in earlier decades, the British, and I'm gonna say that because it's mostly the English, but it encompasses everybody. The British really liked Southern Americans, and that's because Southern American class and culture stratified its way in a lot of the similar ways to the British. So you have economically based accents, and you have lots of very localized accents as well. And you had that like you were saying, like, antebellum stratification of, this is the kind of white person you are versus if you are a black person at all. Like, how they stratify that was very similar to British culture as well, even though it wouldn't have necessarily been on the same racial lines. And something that's been boiling in my brain for quite a long time that I've been trying to pin down, and I just don't think I'm smart enough to get all the way there. But the way that the quote unquote American founding fathers created the US as a country was it's entirely on the British pattern. And one of the things that I feel like really like shows that is that I live in the Midlands. I live in Northampton, and one of the large homes that is in this area that tourists like to go to is Sulgrave Manor. And the reason that place is important is because it is the ancestral home of George Washington, the George Washington. So it was the same aristocrats who were making the world for the British that made the world as Americans. And if you want, like, so George Washington's family at Sulgrave Manor was actually kind of the poor country cousins. If anything, they still had a manor, they still made money, but they were kind of the poor country cousins because they were the poor country cousins to the Spencers, who were actually the large home where I live. And the Spencers are the family of Princess Diana,
of course,
literally royalty. So it was never that, like, it was these plucky people who came over from Britain who wanted to change the way that government and the country was made. It was built entirely on that British pattern. So when the fact that it's the same people making that governmental and cultural pattern from the UK to what became the United States, and then created the exact same class system, although now based on racial standards.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's a straight line. Like it's like,
yeah.
And I don't know where I'm going with this, but I know it's been buzzing in my brain.
And what's funny is, sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying it's really funny you mentioned that, Kai, is because like if you go back and read like the writings of the like early founding fathers, like the founding fathers from northern states at the time, so like what would be New England, so like New York, Massachusetts, etc., Connecticut, would complain about founding fathers from the South, so like Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and a part of Georgia. They would complain and say they're too English, like they want to be England, like they love the plantation system, they love the rigid class system, it's basically a caste system. They're wearing their fancy pants and their pantaloons and they want to be British. And then the founding fathers of the North are like, we're not British, we're Americans. And it's so funny you brought that up because like it's so true. So you have like Jefferson and all the Southern founding fathers are doing their thing, and the Northern founding fathers are like, hey, these motherfuckers, like we want to break away from the crown. We don't want to like continue this bullshit.
Recreate it in their image.
Yeah. Oh,
and it's funny. I don't know about you. Spending time in England, is that you'll see the vestiges, obviously, of the British aristocracy everywhere, and you'll see them in see the royal family in the bloody media all the time. But you'll rarely meet anyone like I've never met anyone that in that class in my life that I'm aware of. Like, no, like they have their own little social clubs and their own schools, their own education system, their own.
It's completely separate from everybody else in the country.
Completely, yeah. So I know of them. I know they exist. Like, I know they're real.
The one time that I could say is that I might have seen one. Is that I went to like one of the grand country houses at Christmas time. They were having like a Christmas light display, and we heard one of the people who were like in the house directing tourists through the house saying like, oh yeah, the family is starting to collect for Christmas, because it was like 2 or 3 days before Christmas. The family's starting to collect, and as we looked out the window, there was like this Land Rover with people who walked out of it wearing full tweed. And like they're hunting dogs and everything. Like, oh, I might have seen one. That's
in the wild.
Yeah, because it was one of the country houses that's still owned by one of the aristocracy. Right? Yeah. Which, you know, there's
they own a ton of land. Like, you can't. There's like very little free access to our countryside in this country. Which I wouldn't know.
Having to do an episode on the Enclosures Act. There we go.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a lazy bastard who just sits on my couch half the time, but you know, people who actually like hiking and stuff are always complaining that there's like beautiful countryside that just it completely is inaccessible because it's owned by some faceless aristocrat who just like, nah, you're not walking on my land. Like, it's crazy.
As for Americans who don't understand that this is a problem.
Yeah.
Because for Americans, all that land is owned by corporations.
Right.
But in the UK, there was like this Enclosures Act, which basically tried to strip the ancient right of way to ramble, to walk through the country, et cetera, et cetera. And like, there could be a whole episode on this. I don't know who would want to hear it.
It's quite, yeah, like people get quite into it over here. Yeah.
No, let's do it. We're totally doing it. We gotta fill some time. We gotta do some episodes on random niche things. So there we go. Yeah. I've met a lot of rich people, so that's crazy that like you never.
I mean, I've met a lot of rich people, but there's a. I mean, a funny thing is as well is that some aristocrats are cash poor, so like they'll have these like big, crumbling, dilapidated manor houses and like no money, but like they're still technically the aristocracy because you know it's their name, it's their birthright. They've just frittered it away because these people don't know how to actually handle money, and you know they're not really raised.
Like, they don't know how to
Saturday job or anything. Yeah.
Well, there was a change and an increase on taxes following World War II. So, I mean, that's exactly what we should be doing. We should be taxing them.
Yeah.
So, like, there was this increase on taxes, which led, like, I think it was inheritance and death tax that like just wiped out families steadily, and that led to the rise of the National Trust. And the National Trust a lot of the time took over these grand houses and kind of restored them or kept them exactly as they were when the families left them. In some cases, the families still survive and they're kind of like in trust with the buildings, but other times it's completely like separated from the families. And like
which is what we should do with Buckingham Palace.
Exactly. Like Charles doesn't even live there. He doesn't like it.
Yeah.
No.
Fuck him. All I know about rich people is David Cameron fucked a pig and some weird shit goes on.
So David Cameron's a genuine he's a genuine aristocrat. So you do see them in politics as well, but of course they'll try and play it down a tiny bit to give like a bit more of an everyman kind of persona.
Oh yes. Oh man. God, what are we talking about?
Well, is there anything else that you want to tell us about your travels through Appalachia or your dissertation, or
what was your favorite part? Like where was your favorite place in Appalachia to go to? What was your favorite state? Was it the country roads in West Virginia? Damn it!
West Virginia by far, yeah. It's just a really unique place. Like I think just the natural beauty for a start is absolutely stunning. But I think even compared to other parts of Appalachia, it's really fascinating because you have a lot of so you have a lovely little old towns, really. So you have like the sort of mom and pop style main streets still running through them. They're all boarded up, and everyone's on heroin, so it's kind of like this like utopian sort of like juxtaposition where it's like Pleasantville and The Wire in like one sort of like obviously it's there's parts of it
Pleasantville and holy shit.
So like
that's fucking great.
It's just pretty unique in terms of how it still looks like a sort of past era of Americana that you kind of romanticize as a tourist especially. Which is really interesting that the history is so concentrated there. Like you were talking about Blair Mountain, and that they all get taught that as school children, so they all have a sort of like everybody knows the Union lingo and stuff, which you just don't really get that kind of class consciousness elsewhere. Even in Appalachia, like I spent a lot of time in East Tennessee, which was lovely, really beautiful, but it felt a lot more like a kind of Republican part of the South in a lot of ways. Whereas West Virginia, you can see why this is like a populist kind of breeding ground, because people here have class consciousness and they have anger. Sometimes it bleeds over into sort of like anti-intellectualism and anti-elitism, because it's just, misdirected rage and stuff. But it's much more kind of like, felt like a lefty hotbed, even if some of them have lost their way. Whereas other parts of Appalachia, apart from the natural beauty, you're like, this could be, and a lot of that strip mall feel as well. So, have, and I don't drive, so, so I would like get like a Best Western through my university, and I'm like, okay, well I can get, but there's like a Walmart across from me, like I'm talking like hundreds of yards. And I was like, what the fuck? How am I going to get to it? Like, I just need to pick up a couple of things. Whereas in West Virginia, even though it's ridiculously remote, once you get to where you want to be, it's kind of like weirdly walkable and less sort of soulless and car-centric, like a lot of the big parts of the US are. I mean, it's my own fault for not really driving, but still, it doesn't breed a nice kind of culture when it's so car-centric.
Some damn foreigner telling us that we can't have our damn cars get cuffed by public transportation. God damn it. I want 5 interchanges and 17 lanes in my Ford F-350. God damn it.
I remember specifically when I first moved over here, I was reading a news story from back in my hometown in Florida, and that I came from one of the top 10 most dangerous areas for pedestrians in the country.
Hell yeah.
moving to England where I can like I still live kind of far away from things that you can actually walk to where I am. Yeah. But like when we used to live where you could like walk to a store without sweating.
Yeah.
Just be able to, get through life, maybe go to a doctor's appointment. Like it was great.
I will say that. No, sorry, go ahead. Go. No, you first.
Out of time.
You first.
I just look at Google Maps quite a lot, when I was over there. And every time I wouldn't learn, I'd be like, oh, okay, it's only around the corner. It's like, but there's no fucking sidewalk. You can't get there. Like,
yeah. Nope.
The amount. So I'm from Orlando, and when I go home, we see the amount of like European, mostly British tourists who like obviously got a hotel that thought like, oh, it's walking distance to Universal, and like we're rolling by in our car going like, you fuckers, it is not walking distance to Universal. I know it says it's a quarter of a mile. It's a quarter of a mile on blacktop highway in 90 degrees. Like no,
bro, you ain't making it.
And they're doing it in fucking Harry Potter cosplay. Like if you get hit, you get hit. I don't.
Ungario Leviosa, this shit.
Orlando gets the worst British tourists. Like we import our worst to Disney World.
Oh yeah.
I will say that Birmingham, where I'm at now, is a lot more more walkable than probably a lot of places because it's such an older, in U.S. terms, older city, and it was a coal mining and steel hub,
right?
So like you have the hills, the mountains that surround it, and you have the city of Birmingham very condensed in this area, so that it is excuse me, it is fairly like it's fairly walkable, better than to the point where like I can walk to, and this is so funny because it's such an American thing, like I can walk to a bar, I can walk to probably
I just don't.
Like around, it's like I have two bars in walking distance, or like I'm pretty sure in other parts of the world it's like 50 in walking distance, but like there's two, and then like I could walk to get food in like a restaurant, but I couldn't walk to the grocery store. But if you had to walk or take a bike, Birmingham is better, I think, than a lot of US places, especially newer, larger cities that aren't surrounded by mountains, right? So if Birmingham could have spread out, I mean the suburbs that are obviously spread out in their own different like separate entities, but like the city itself is for the most part fairly walkable. I was surprised coming from Montgomery that is not walkable at all. It's so far spread out. It was nice to be able to walk. I mean, New York City, nothing beats New York City. Like that's the best. But like when it comes to public transportation and walking, but Birmingham,
right? But everywhere else, yeah. What always blows my mind is when you have like a parking lot outside of a bar and it's like, in the middle of nowhere, just like right, yeah.
I think I remember when you were over here and you were saying like we're messing on Instagram. You're just like, how the fuck do I get from here to here? I was like, well, there's no Uber, so you're gonna have to walk. Good luck. I love that debate on Facebook when like Europeans are like, why do Americans drive everywhere and blah 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 blah, why don't they ever leave the US? I was like, do you understand how fucking big this country is? And it was like
I always defend Americans when that sort of like discourse comes up, especially about the percentage that don't have a passport. I'm like, it's a massive fucking country and it's got like beaches and lakes and mountains all like you could drive to. And if in this country, if we had anything resembling a summer, like nobody would have a passport because like the vast majority of the people in this country have a passport purely to go to Spain for 2 weeks of the year to get some sun. So it's like, let's not look down on the Americans about that. Like
we have a friend of the podcast in Brighton, and she was showing us the beach, and I was like, why is it fucking rocks? Like, why is it fucking rocks? Where's the
She
sand?
invited me down there, sending me a picture one time of the hole she had to dig for her ass to be in so that she could lay down.
It's so uncomfortable. I actually used to live in Brighton, and it was always just like, wow, this sucks. I'm just sitting on like the sharpest thing ever. Like.
Let's
I
build,
don't know.
instead of a sand castle, let's build a stone castle, y'all. Do it.
I don't know if Americans who are used to sand beaches and warm weather know the smell of a stone beach in cold weather. It is far different, and it's not fun. It smells like decay. It smells like fish.
At the moment, it certainly does, because the Tories just started dumping human turds back into the sea again, didn't they? So
What?
Don't swim. Do not swim. It is full of sewage.
What happened?
Raw sewage. Yeah.
What are the Tories doing?
They just were like, okay, so we're gonna like deregulate this, so you can just pump unlimited sewage into the rivers, into the It used to be a thing in like the 80s and the 90s, the last time they were in. Because I remember, like, as a kid, we'd go on holiday and my dad would be like, don't go in the sea. Like, and then it got better for a little bit, but of course, one parting gift is before they left office, they had to just like...
Yeah, they contaminated a whole bunch of water sources, so there was like whole counties that had to boil their water and everything. It's awful.
Good God.
It's a hellscape. It's absolutely miserable. Yeah.
The way that island is described half the time is just like, why?
No,
what is happening?
You're gonna come over, and I'm gonna show you around, and I'm gonna show you some good places. Okay, we're gonna go to the mountains in Wales, and we're gonna go to like the Brecon Beacons. We're just gonna go to Wales. We're not gonna spend any time in England. Maybe we'll make it up to the Highlands
if we pronounce vowels.
If we have the time, we'll go up to Scotland, and you can see some wildlife and wilderness.
What the fuck did she just say?
You're gonna be nice to the Welsh while I'm around, okay? You're gonna be nice.
I know you're right, Kai. The countryside, at least from apparently you can't walk on the ground in the countryside. You get shot by some geezer with a double barrel shotgun from like World War II.
There literally are like ancient walking paths that are protected, like. And for the most part now, like if you go to like a lot of like popular areas for walking, if there's a field, like nobody's going to stop you from walking across that field, except if there's cows. If there's cows, they'll tell you to.
I'm an American. I can go wherever the fuck I want. I just be like,
and get killed by a fucking cow. You'll be the cow news for that.
Let's go, fucking cow. Let's go wrestle. No, I just love I love the TikTok thing about when Americans like run into UK roadmen. And they're like trying to hold him up with a knife, and it's like, dude, what the fuck are you doing?
I did have that feeling.
Laughing at UK roadmen, they're like, dude, are you serious? We're gonna fight now.
What, like a Crocodile Dundee sketch?
Yeah, that's not a knife.
Call that a knife?
This is a Glock.
When I very first moved over here, the first few months that I moved over here, my husband and I I wanted to see Canterbury Cathedral. So we were in Canterbury, and it was after dark, and we were walking back from dinner, and there was a pub where somebody was obviously like having a fight, not like a fist fight, but there was like a loud fight that was spilling out the door. And coming from an American context, I was like terrified for a few moments, because that means there's going to be a gun, there's going to be shots, somebody's going to get hurt. And I had to like talk myself down in my head saying, that's not going to happen here. There is gun crime in the country, and where you live, I hear that's the highest gun crime in the country in Nottingham. But there is gun crime, but it's like it's so minimal compared to where I came from. It's like if somebody wants to hurt me, if somebody wants to steal something from me, they got to get fucking close to me. They can't stand down the street and shoot me. Like we can have a tussle now.
Yeah, and God help anyone who tries to tussle with Kai. Kai will stab you. Kai is a UK roadman.
What's
That's not
funny,
a knife.
actually,
This is a knife.
When I was in Tennessee, and I had an Uber driver who had a gun on his lap as he was driving me.
You told me about this.
Yeah. And what was funny about, I felt kind of bad for him, because I think his mental, which is just what you want, someone with poor mental health and a gun. His mental health wasn't great because he'd just been like carjacked recently. So I was like, dude, I'm really sorry about that. But like, it wasn't even in a holster or anything. It was like just loosely flying around. I was like, oh my.
One hard turn, and we're gonna see who catches this bullet.
Or was it my head blown off in the back seat? Like, and he was like, he was obviously never left the state or anything. He was asking me loads of questions about England, and he said, I wouldn't go over there. Like, I won't go to Europe. I wanted to once, but like, it's just too dangerous now. And I was like, you think that's what you want to go to Germany. So I was like, Germany's really, really, really safe. Like you're driving your car with a gun, like because you're so scared. Like, like how much more dangerous do you think somewhere can get? It's so funny that they have that perception of Europe as being. I blame that film Taken quite a lot with Liam Neeson.
Oh my God, yes. I was like, I'm not going to Eastern Europe, man. Fuck this shit. Sorry, Poland. I'm not going to Warsaw.
Were you going to Poland? Were you going to Poland? Of all places.
You're right. I'm good, man. Oh man, that reminds me of a time my buddy Rick and I were in his Hummer, like driving off road, and we were going camping. And we had the guns in the back, and he was like, "Hey, can you grab a drink out of the cooler?" And I was like, "I can't." And he's like, "Why?" It's because the guns are blocking the cooler. I was like, this is so American right now, is that we have so many firearms that we can't get to the food. So
yeah, it's a jarring experience to go to the US culturally from the gun standpoint. I think that's the biggest thing that you notice. Where you're just like, what the fuck?
Bang, 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 bang. That whole and then I know we're getting completely off topic, but the Olympics in Paris when Americans were getting pickpocketed and like beating the shit out of the pickpocketers. They're like, what the fuck? And like chasing them down and just beating the shit out of them. It was like, you don't understand. People don't get pickpocketed in the US. If they do, there's gonna be a fight. Someone's gonna die. It's like, you just took all my shit. Like, fuck you. But I thought that was the funniest thing. It was like all the TikToks was saying like France has now employed Americans to cut down on pickpocketing because just beat the shit out of the pickpockets. Oh man. God bless America. You know, greatest country in the world. Am I right, y'all?
I do miss it. I do miss it.
I'll trade. I'll move to the UK and we'll trade citizenships.
It's an exchange program. You get to come over here every year.
So like if you were gonna sum up, you like this is the end. You're almost at the end. You've almost defended your dissertation. If you were going to conclude your dissertation, what was your overall take of your experience in Appalachia in the U.S.? Like what were your main takeaways? Like what was your overall, like what did you? I don't even know how to word it. I'm so tired.
I think mainly that sort of optimistic, really, that there's like a lot of potential for organizing amongst working class people. It's just not being tapped into currently, because of the sort of clusterfuck that is electoral politics on both sides of the Atlantic. So yeah, it was a relatable kind of. Somebody asked me while I was in Appalachia, actually, they were like, "What part of Britain would you compare to?" I was like, "Oh God, that's such a good question. Like, what is the Appalachia of Britain?" And I was like, there isn't one really. There's a composite elements of definitely the similarities with South Wales, anywhere that was previously mining, which obviously Thatcher destroyed in the 80s. But in terms of the sort of like cultural stereotypical hold it has over the US imagination, I don't think there's quite a comparison. There's definitely a lot of snobbery in England, like that's like regional specific. But yeah, but having said that, I still found it like, I was like, basically people are saying the world over, like the working man's getting shafted absolutely everywhere, and you know, you can find points to organize and to relate to people quite easily. Obviously, I was aware of the fact, like we said before, that I did have this sort of novelty factor, so people were always very open to talking to me. I'm also white and a woman, so I don't know if you possibly find like some more malevolence amongst these communities if you dug a little deeper or you looked a little different. I try in my thesis, I try not to sort of romanticize the Appalachian left, because I just don't think it's a great thing to do in any context to romanticize political movements. But there's definitely and it's, you know, at the moment there's a lot of regressive sort of social conservatism seems to be like what you really struggle with. And it's comparable, so like Fox News and what have you is like always seen as a sort of the bogeyman over there, and increasingly these nefarious online, what 4chan or whatever it is, these sort of incels fall down. And obviously like that, I don't really know what the answer is as to how you sort of counteract those forces. In Britain, I think ours is more sort of the tabloid press. So our newspapers, as you probably know, are particularly nasty and insidious, and still, for some reason, I naively thought we were sort of getting past that stage. When I campaigned for Corbyn in 2019, I knew that obviously all the papers hated him, but there was such a like sort of groundswell of support amongst younger people. I was like, you know what, things are changing. People don't read these shitty papers anymore. And then obviously we all know how that went down. I was like, oh fuck yeah, we've still got a good generation to go before people are going to really sort of counteract that. Yeah, but basically my overall impression of Appalachia is that like it's a fascinating region on the one hand and very unique on the one hand, but also there's a lot of universality there where you're just like, these are just ordinary folk who could definitely benefit from joining a union like we all could, and, you know, fighting back. So yeah, it was a great experience. I didn't, maybe the last 6 months will have been having like Jack Nicholson from The Shining writing psychosis. I've regretted it slightly, but other than that, I think, yeah, I think it was a great experience. It made me question a lot of things about my own politics and about the left over here, for sure.
So we have said quite often on the show, it's like a rallying point that we get to almost all the time, that with American politics, when it comes to the liberal coastal Western centers, that when they say like, oh, we should just cut off the South, and if we extend that to Appalachia as well, we should just cut them off, and that impacts the South and Appalachia's ability to, I don't know, cross-pollinate their leftism to reach other centers. And we say that quite a lot just from our own standpoint. So does that come out in your research? Does that come out anywhere in it?
100%, yeah. Like the sort of animosity between, I hate to borrow a sort of Trumpian term, but like the coastal elite, and you sort of fly over country or whatever. There's all this whole vocabulary sort of sprung up overnight in the 2010s to explain like geographical, again, and usually to explain a class difference through a sort of regional lens. But yeah, I think the snobbery and the sort of using the South and Appalachia specifically as like the punchline to these really sort of reductive jokes just doesn't help anyone. And it is, I would put most of the blame on the sort of liberals class for perpetuating this, because you know, you can read it two ways. You can see that there's a lot of liberals who are just sort of misguided, and that actually, because I think I was probably what you'd consider a liberal at one point. My politics were all over the fucking shop about 10 years ago. So, you know,
Nelson, shut your mouth. We all went through it.
I mean, we've all got receipts, you know, and you go on your Facebook memories and you're like, what the fuck was I on about here? Jesus Christ.
There's this Obama fella.
I vote for him a third time.
Obama.
So yeah, you know, like I don't want to be disparaging about something that I've only really, in relative terms, recently sort of got my head around. But then I think there's also like a liberal class who have no intention of changing anything, and actually just like the sort of self-congratulatory tone of being anti-racist, inverted commas, or being like, you know, listening, learning, Me Too, all this, and it's just all bullshit, really. They don't want to challenge power. They don't want to, and we've seen this with the genocide in Palestine. Like a lot of people showing their true colours once, which just should be the most ultimate litmus test of anyone's fucking humanity, let alone their politics. But to see people sort of kind of still rally around the Democratic Party like there's some sort of football team, you know, what the fuck? Like, what do you think they even stand for at this point? Like, just, yeah, it's frustrating. And it's those sort of people that I absolutely just have no, like, first against the wall, you know.
Yeah. Damn Yankees.
fucking Portland liberals get the wall, according to soon to be Dr. Elle.
Fucking Pacific Northwest polycule assholes.
Actually, there's a lot of polyamory in Appalachia. That's a whole other.
First off, hold on, time out. We're following the Bible when it comes to that in Appalachia, not that godless polyamory out west.
Yeah.
Appalachian polyamory, no blue hair involved, apparently.
Tell you what, brother. My pronouns are USA. And this is my wife's boyfriend.
Which also makes him my boyfriend. Okay, you want to fight about it?
It ain't gay.
Yeah, I met quite a few Appalachian polyamorous. So yeah, I would pitch an article on it if I wouldn't feel like slightly implicated in the whole polycule situation.
No, we're not saying that you have to parachute in and become part of the polycule in order to write about it.
Yeah, I went deep undercover, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Several covers. All the covers. Oh, we got him. We got him. There he goes.
I can't laugh too much because I can't fucking breathe. Oh, man. Oh, God. God damn it, Kai. It's been a rough day. I needed that. So I don't want to keep you both up any later than y'all want to be, but
yeah, I am sort of recovering from COVID myself, but
I just real quick, it kind of flows in perfectly to like just real quick what's been going on Turf Island the past few weeks with it just seems like we talked about like the failures of the UK left and almost like the failures of like the American left in the same aspect to you have, it seems like both traditional like more so probably in the UK, but like left working class than the US, like the white like working class, etc. But then you have the complete almost delusion of it, and you have these racist riots in areas that used to be just I may be completely wrong, but it seemed like in areas that used to be part of that what they call the Red Wall, and like seemed to be very left wing, very heavily labor, are now like voting for Brexit and devolving into like racist gangs beating up anyone that's like a lighter shade of brown. So like just real quick before you guys both go to bed, can you just talk about that just a little bit? Like it's odd, especially someone like from the outside looking in. It's like, what the fuck? Like what happened?
Right. Yeah. So first point of contention is that I actually avoid saying the UK left. I try to avoid saying the UK full stop. And this is because I have a very good Irish friend who's from Derry, and she essentially beat it out of me to not say the UK. So it's like one of those electric collars now. I'm like, oh God, I just said the UK. But so of course, the UK refers to, it's the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland, if you're an Irish Republican, it's a colonial outpost. It's an occupation. So I don't say that, and I also don't say it because usually what people mean is England. And it's funny, Kai touched on that a little bit before. She's saying like Britain, but I mean England, and we all do it. And the irony is that a lot of the time, people say Britain or the UK to try and sound less parochial and less sort of English centric. But half the time you're like, well, where do you mean? Because this isn't happening in Scotland. So there was no riots in Scotland that I heard about. So yeah, it's an English problem, and it is a very English sort of centric problem in a lot of ways because England is by far the most right-wing part of Britain. That's the reason we keep getting Tories is because of English voters. It's like, for fuck's sake, like seriously, guys, like. And I live in England, so like God knows what it must be like to be Scottish and be like, can we just get rid of, like, can we just sever this fucking fascist like parasite below us. So yeah, I think it's an English problem, and the difficulty with talking about it is you can see how uncomfortable I am because see, I'm happy to talk about class, but as soon as I start talking about race, you're like, oh god, what are we gonna say? English. I don't want to make excuses for anyone. So the first thing to say is that England is a very fucking racist country, and it always was, always is. I think a lot of people of my generation who've had like a sort of American cultural sort of soft power, whatever, like we're very kind of like, oh, you know, worst thing you can be as a racist, like, you know, it's embarrassing. It's like makes you look like a complete fucking idiot. But growing up in the north of England, in a sort of red wall area, to borrow a term, most of the racism was against Pakistanis, who made up a significant portion of the community, especially in sort of the northwest, where they would come to work in the cotton mills, using the cotton from the American South, and you know, on and on that sort of cycle of capitalism and racism went. And yeah, a lot of it is just mean-spirited, nasty, nefarious racism. It's also that the recent riots are tied to violence against children, which is like has this weird. I mean, obviously nobody fucking likes violence against children, you'd think, but then we're watching a genocide every day, and apparently that's okay. But there's like this sort of dog whistle thing about anything that's like a sort of like black or brown bogeyman attacking like white children. It seems to like sort of be like a tinderbox thing. There was like a whole thing with like grooming gangs, like I want to say about 20 years ago now, where there was like Pakistani gangs that were like abusing white children who were in care, who were in sort of the foster system because nobody was looking out for them, so they were an easy target. So that all became like a big racist thing that's never really gone away in the north. So I think they tapped into sort of that and brought that back. And obviously it was all bollocks anyway. The guy was British. It sounds like he probably had some sort of horrific mental health breakdown, kind of like a mass shooter style thing, but obviously we don't have access to guns over here. But the rumor that was that he was an asylum seeker and he was Muslim and he was like sort of been allowed in the country to terrorize our nice white children. And yeah, it just went from there. So on the surface, I'm just like, well, that's just racist bullshit. People spend too much time on the internet. People are racist. People like an excuse to smash things up. You know, like not everything needs some big sort of economic excuse for the white working class and everything. Having said that, obviously, I think there is a huge level of kind of listlessness in these areas that is only going to get worse. And there's a lot of sort of anti-establishment sentiment, like we were talking about earlier, that I don't want to sound condescending because it's like they don't know what they're doing, they don't really understand it, like they understand full well what they're doing half the time, but I think it's misdirected rage against, they know they're being shafted, like we all are, but without the language to kind of like direct that where it belongs. Tale as old as time, they will find a scapegoat, and asylum seekers is the sort of big one at the moment, stoked, of course, again by the tabloid press, who for all my lifetime have been running horrific headlines about asylum seekers. I mean, it was 12 last time I checked, 12 people died in a dinghy trying to make the coast of England and the English Channel yesterday, children amongst them. And it just, yeah, it really, really frustrates me that you like, that, you know, I know people I grew up with who will share things and it's like, you know, stop the boats that come into it. It's like, for fuck's sake, like, you weren't a bad person. I remember that you know, that you're not a complete piece of shit, but you're saying publicly that you think people deserve to drown in the channel. Like, I don't know how we combat that, really. I don't know how you sort of tap into people's shared humanity rather than these horrible racist sort of cultural clusterfucks. So yeah, I don't know if he, as a outsider living here, has a better sort of insight into, and obviously your partner's from Rotherham as well, which was one of the worst spots for it. So
yeah. The only thing that I could come up with when it came to the riots is that if you press people down long enough and then give them a scapegoat to go with, it takes the heat off of the actual boot that's on your neck, the actual, like, the whole system that's stacked up on top of you. And if you can visibly spot that scapegoat because they're brown, because they're black, because they're wearing a hijab or wearing, like prayer costume, anything like that, then it's, of course, the anger is going to end up going sideways. And that doesn't mean that it's justified. It means that they have created the perfect tinderbox. They've created this perfect like channel system for it to go to someone else. And actually, when you were describing it, it never really occurred to me before, but I think we've seen some glimmerings of the kind of QAnon flavor of I don't even know what to call it, conspiracy theory, everything about it. There's a flavor to it, and that doesn't mean that it's necessarily QAnon has like this tendril growing in Britain. It's that story constantly is the one that is going to be able to be used to make those conspiracy theories. So when you have somebody who's visibly othered, who the boot that's on your neck is saying is the one who is stealing the crumbs from you, then you will end up saying like, oh, they're stealing from our children, they're hurting our children, they're hurting our nice white women, they're, all of these, like, there's flavors of patriarchy and QAnon and racism that Britain is not ready to confront yet, or England is not ready to confront yet. Although I wouldn't be surprised if it's in parts of the other parts of Britain as well. But like it's an old tinderbox when you have like the north of England that's been economically disadvantaged compared to the south of England for hundreds of years, when there's a marked cultural divide, when you have this system coming down on you and forcing you into these austerity measures, which apparently we're going to be getting another round of austerity measures. And then you say like, the crumbs that you have, they're being taken by the brown people who showed up yesterday. And it just like, it exploded. It just exploded.
Yeah, it's interesting as well that similar things are happening in Ireland, as in the Republic of Ireland, because obviously we all, I'm Irish descent, like a lot of people in the northwest of England. My mum's from Dublin, but we romanticize the Irish left quite a lot because they did something about it and fought sort of decolonial stuff, but they're having terrible racism problems over there, and it's like people are sort of like, what? How can Irish people be racist? Everyone's racist to them. They emigrated all around the world. They can't be racist to immigrants. And I just think, like, well, we're all like, right? Like, but then you just like, that's just such a silly like way of looking at it. Anybody who's struggling and anybody who's poor is vulnerable to like you say, just being tempted to I like that term, to sort of send their rage sideways, basically. There was a really similar incident in Dublin. There was a stabbing outside a school, and I think it actually was an asylum seeker, unfortunately. And it all went completely. They rioted. It went completely crazy. So yeah, it's a wider problem. It's not just an English problem, but there is a specific type of English asshole that like that really.
Dublin turned into Boston. We all saw it.
Well, it's interesting.
Reminding everybody, we aren't anti-Irish American podcast. Let's not forget. That's for the old school listeners. We're an anti-Irish American podcast. And now the disease of Irish Americanism is creeping its way back over the Atlantic to Ireland itself. Right,
because my friend, the one who's from Derry, actually, her research was on the Irish diaspora, and she considers me Irish, and she has a lot of time for me because the Irish diaspora in Britain is like typically been quite left wing, but she hates the Irish American diaspora because she's like, what the
Oh
fuck
my
happened
god,
there? Like,
I would love
Fucking
to
mess.
talk to her. I would love to talk to her. Be like, let me tell you about these patty fucks.
Careful now,
Careful shit. They can fuck right off. They want to take the othered away from the
You can't use a
Italians.
slur for actual Irish people to an Irish person.
Look,
Nelson, I am the sensitivity listener here. Shut your mouth.
you're making the mistake in considering them people, but you know.
Nelson, Jesus Christ.
Not the Irish in Ireland. We've gone over this, okay? They steamed across the Atlantic.
But you have just said, and I quote, you're going to talk to this person who is friends with our lovely guest and then use an Irish slur to their
I wouldn't
face.
recommend it. I don't think it'd go down very well.
They ruined Boston. They take over this country.
What's funny about the Irish Americans is they're hardly ever very high percentage Irish anyway. It's such a strange talking about identity. Like, Jesus Christ! Like,
yeah, oh my God.
I remember when I studied in Boston actually for a year, and I still remember the St. Patrick's Day. Like, people falling over them fucking selves to tell me. I was like, all right, good for you. Like, great. Like,
I'm eighth generation Irish. Shut the fuck up. You're not shit. You're an American. It's like, I'm more Italian than you're Irish. No, so real quick, I've always seen a distinct parallel between like the US and all the, just say the United Kingdom, because it has to deal with the government from the 80s onward, right? So you have like the Reaganism and Thatcherism just like gutting the working class, the economy, and just like gutting social services, right, all through the 80s. And then in the US you had George H.W. Bush, and then Thatcher was after that was John Major, right? So you have the continuation of that bullshit. And then you have in like the third way politics of New Labor and like the New Democratic, like the Bill Clinton-esque Democratic Party, and then like Tony Blair's New Labor, who abandoned the historical like progressivism and even to the UK like socialism of the Labor Party, and just like this watered down pro-capitalist, we're on our surface, we're Labor, and on the surface we're Democrats, but really we're going to kind of continue on what Reagan and Thatcher and Major and Bush did, and not really fix things. And they both are, the long drawn out terms, and then Blair into the Iraq War and really just gutting like any legitimacy of the Labor Party, and just gutting, like in Clinton gutting the Democratic Party and Blair gutting the Labor Party. And it just seems like, there's nothing left. It's like where that's why I think a lot of people are so fed up with the Democratic Party, is because they've abandoned even this, like the hint of progressivism under FDR and Johnson, like, for like obviously the nuance of the racial issues and the racism in the Democratic Party back then, but like the economic, they've always been like an economic populist party, and abandoning that completely. And it seems like the Labor Party did that too. And then you have the rise of Sanders and Corbyn, and then them both just getting destroyed in the press and gutted and cast aside. And it just seems like you have Appalachia, which was a traditionally like blue, solid, working class, pro-union Democrat stronghold, and then you had the North, which is the Red Wall, and it's just collapsing because there's nobody, or it's switched sides almost, because there's nobody there they have no one else to vote for. It's just like, all right, Labor's fucked us over. We can go, they're not going to go Tory, but they'll go reform. And the same with Appalachia. It's like, the Democrats fucked us over. The Clinton gave us NAFTA. So, we'll go to the Republicans, and well, at least Trump, I've heard so many times like, oh, Trump's an outsider, or Trump's not like the establishment. He's going to drain the swamp, etc. He's a fucking billionaire Yankee. He has nothing. There's nothing, like, he doesn't care. He wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire, right? He doesn't give a shit. And it seems like that is from the 80s onward, you just seem like, in the US, like I said, I'm not all that familiar with UK politics. I know kind of like just below the surface. but it just seems like that parallel of what was the party of working class people has abandoned any sense of working class solidarity for that, that liberalism. Like the people who will read Hillbilly Edgeley and be like, yeah, this is right. I listen to NPR and my Volvo while going to buy Dave Matthews Band tickets are the same people that I'm going to listen to Oasis while I go listen to whatever on I don't know what the fuck it is over there, but I found that like when I saw this on TikTok and Kyle was talking about it a few episodes ago, it just seemed like it was a culmination of of the failures of the traditional working class parties to be like, hey, as punch up. And as Kai said, well, there's no one to tell people to punch up anymore. So they're going to start punching sideways, and they're going to be like, oh, it's that meme. It's like the rich person saying, hey, that has all their cookies. It's like, hey, that guy over there is going to take your last cookie. And it's like pointing at the black guy. So that's how I saw it, as like a parallel through political history. Is just like the two major working class parties, Labor probably being more so than the Democratic Party, but both being hollowed out now and like just a shell of their former selves, and it's kind of just like, giving the middle finger to everybody and just saying we're just going to be like every other political party now.
I think they're phenomenally similar, and I think the reason is just sort of not to get too academic about it, because nobody needs that, is that you sort of have the New Deal order, which took you to the 70s from the 30s, obviously, and the idea of a political order is that you compel your opposition to adopt certain norms. So in terms of the New Deal order, it was the idea that there was like a certain level of welfare in a US sort of way. Like Eisenhower Republicans were taxed really high and they didn't have a problem with it, sort of thing. And then the sort of neoliberal order comes with Reagan. But the key thing is where the order triumphed, as you said, is when Clinton came to power and he fundamentally didn't actually roll back any of the deregulation of Reagan. So that, and then similarly with Tony Blair, I think, I don't know if it's a myth or not, I'd like to get to the bottom of it, but there's a sort of common refrain that Margaret Thatcher supposedly said her greatest achievement was New Labour. So that's sort of, yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. I mean, we can't ask her anymore because she's dead, but...
Well, I'm sure she's looking up at us now, saying like,
So yes, the only key difference I would say is that the Republicans in the US obviously sort of tapped into this kind of religious conservatism that we don't have an equivalent of over here, thank God. There's culture war shit that's really started the last sort of 5 years over here about trans people, and a bunch of other fucking stupid, bigoted misdirections. But I've always been grateful that like the sort of abortion stuff just isn't really a thing over here. Like you can't sort of tap into that, and there's a lot of people who would potentially be economically fairly left, but if they've grown up in a sort of Christian fundamentalism, they're gonna get wrapped up in all that shit. It's a really good tool for the US ruling class to keep the working classes down. So I'm always, if I'm grateful for anything, having spent far too long of my life on Turf Island, as you say, is that we're not a very religious place, because I think that is the one good thing you can say.
It's going to come back though. Just watch. We all saw V for Vendetta. It's going to come back.
I think it's so weird that like C of E is so like ingrained in schools. I kind of likened it when I first moved here to like the country had like a countrywide religious vaccination by having like this light layer of Church of England infused in them through their childhoods, to the point that it's just like, oh, this is ridiculous. Like we have the vaccination against the like harder core religious factions, so we can just kind of slough it off. But there's still some amount of puritanical, almost, like kind of like Cromwellian ideas that exist within the laws as they are now, but it's so thin, like this thin little layer. So like you still have restrictions on abortions, but they're not going to be attacked the same way that they would be in the States.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's like it's this like this weird kind of like layer.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
Tony Blair, I think was asked by an American journalist once a question about God, and Alistair Campbell, his sort of sinister spin doctor right-hand man, was like, "We don't do God." just shut it down straight away. If a politician started talking about God, we'd have them sectioned. I think, well, what the fuck's going on here? Like, we just don't have that kind of. Yes.
Right.
Again, small mercies.
Yeah.
There's one thing we got.
Yeah.
It's the NHS and no crazy religious politicians.
The last vestiges of the NHS and a vaccination against most religious extremism.
All right, so yeah, that was great. Let's go ahead and
that was gret. Yeah.
Do the outro real quick and
most fun I've had at this time of the morning without any alcohol. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, at What's Left of the South, we believe the South will rise again, but this time for the right reasons, those being worker-owned means of production, decolonization, and self-determination for all oppressed peoples. Make sure to click on our link tree in the show notes to find out, to find all our social media, Spotify playlist, and our merch store, and to subscribe to our Patreon. You can hear our After Dark series. Shout out to all our Patreon subscribers. Our podcast, our producer is Mr. Speaker. Our theme music is by the band The Last Thing You Remember, edited by Psychotic Refuge. We are coming to you from the Magic City, Birmingham, Alabama, as well as, well, not today, but normally, Sweet Georgia and jolly old England. We would also like to recognize we're recording on occupied land that rightfully belongs to the Muskogee and Cherokee Nation. Elle, thank you so much. Where can people find you online real quick? If you want anyone to find you online,
gosh.
any work.
I'm trying to I'm applying for jobs at the moment, so I put on my social media private.
Yeah, don't look her up. She doesn't exist.
You can attest to the memes that I share. That not necessarily. But I'm on Twitter. I think I'm fairly professional on there. So I'm ELLE_GRIFF87, I believe.
Soon to be doctor, PhD.
Yes, we hope.
Yay!
Yeah.
Mark isn't here to say some quib. Kai, do you have anything? Kai, do you want to say anything witty before I stop the recording?
I like that you called it hillbilly edgily, because that's exactly what JD Vance is. He's a hillbilly, but only edgily.
And he's gooning with the couch.